Jonathan Harris on Biography, the Emmy-winning series, premieres next only on A&E. He's Doctor in Space, but your greatest act was faking a British accent so no one would know you were really from the Bronx. Congratulations, Jonathan Harris. You are Biography, the Emmy-winning series. Premieres next, only on A&E.
American Justice. For November 27, 2002, Biography with Harry Smith.
Jonathan Harris, the beloved actor who died earlier this month, will be remembered as one of television's most effective scene stealers. While many actors abandon their most famous roles for fear of being typecast, Jonathan Harris never turned his back on Dr. Zachary Smith, the dastardly yet charming villain of TV's Lost in Space. At the time of his death, Harris was working on a new Lost in Space TV movie, one that would have reportedly brought the Jupiter 2 crew home after nearly 40 years and countless reruns. As fans of the classic show mourn Harris's passing, we look back at his remarkable journey from the Bronx to the farthest reaches of space and beyond.
I want you to see for yourself what a wonderful person he really is.
He was cowardly, nasty,
Mind your manners, Ninny, or you'll lose your friends.
and arrogant.
Never fear, Smith is here.
For 3 seasons, Jonathan Harris played the scheming Dr. Zachary Smith on the hit science fiction series Lost in Space.
What is the meaning of this?
He was very acerbic, very, very funny and charming.
How true, how true.
The role of the blue-blooded villain seemed to be tailor-made for him. Yet Harris's sophisticated persona was completely fabricated.
People ask him if he's British. He says, "No, I'm not British. I'm just affected."
I beg your pardon.
The elegant ruse fueled a career that has included more than 500 film and television appearances and work in voiceovers.
It is up to me to rescue the performers.
But it was his portrayal of Dr. Zachary Smith that made Jonathan Harris a TV icon and a cult hero to legions of sci-fi fans.
Never fear, Smith is here.
The Bronx, New York, home of the Botanical Gardens, Yankee Stadium, and the Bronx Zoo. It was here on November 6, 1914, that Jonathan Harasukine was born. He was the second of Sam and Jenny Harasukine's 3 children. Jonathan's father was a Russian Jewish immigrant, eking out a living in Manhattan's garment district. His mother, Jenny, was a practical but oddly distant woman.
My mother was a strange lady. We never got to the bottom of her. It seemed to me, in retrospect, she did not take joy in her children.
The Harasukines lived in a 6-story tenement building. Making ends meet was always a struggle for the family. Jonathan felt the effects early on.
My mother took in boarders, and I was horrified with that, because the boarder slept in my bed in my room, and I slept on the dining room chairs.
He hated it, but he knew that they had to take in boarders at that time for them to survive and for them to eat.
Jonathan was also expected to contribute to the family finances. Employment took the place of childhood fun. By the age of 12, he was working a regular job as a stockboy at the local pharmacy. But while there was little money for luxuries, Sam Harasukine took efforts to expand his son's cultural horizons. There were occasional trips to the neighborhood Yiddish theater. Sam also introduced young Jonathan to opera.
My father and I sat in the dining room where the radio was and listened to the opera. I fell in love.
For Jonathan, the performing arts offered an escape. Broadway plays were also of particular interest, but he couldn't afford tickets, so Jonathan became an expert at sneaking into shows he wanted to see. By the time he entered James Monroe High School in 1927, Jonathan was harboring dreams of joining the performers he loved on the stage. But to be an actor, he would first have to learn how to speak like an actor.
I knew that I was talking New Yorkese. You want to go for coffee? That's your pure New Yorkie. And I hated it. But I went to the art theater and all the wonderful B English movies.
I didn't ask for whiskey and soda.
And I said, I'm going to talk like that.
I said 2 whiskeys and soda.
Can you imagine what it was like for him to be learning to speak correctly and living in the Bronx? Can you imagine how affected he must sound with his friends on the street?
By his senior year of high school, Jonathan had abandoned all things he considered common. He was well-spoken and took great delight in such intellectual pursuits as archaeology, Latin, romantic poetry, and Shakespeare. But while he didn't quite fit in with his peers, one student did take notice of the budding bon vivant. Gertrude Bregman also shared a love of the finer things in life. Romance blossomed in the high school hallways, and in the spring, the couple went to the prom. Afterwards, Jonathan treated Gertrude to a late dinner at the Russian tea room.
I'd heard or read that that was very showbiz and you're in when you go there.
After graduating from high school, Jonathan was ready to say goodbye to his old existence once and for all. But one tie to the past needed to be severed.
He asked his father if they could please change his name because he had always been embarrassed by the name. They were made fun of in school.
In 1932, the 18-year-old walked into the municipal courthouse as Jonathan Harris-Ukeen and came out Jonathan Harris. While he still yearned to be an actor, Harris didn't dare tell his parents. Instead, inspired by his days at the drugstore, he enrolled at Fordham University in New York and pursued a more practical career in pharmacology. The decision pleased his mother and father. Harris received his diploma 4 years later and began working in drugstores in New York City. In 1938, Jonathan married his longtime sweetheart Gertrude and moved into a modest but elegant apartment in Manhattan. Harris's evolution from immigrant son to sophisticated New Yorker was complete, but he wanted more. Jonathan's strong desire to act led him to take a bold move. In 1939, the 25-year-old doctored up a phony resume and tried out for the repertory company at the Mill Pond Playhouse in Roslyn, Long Island. Harris watched dozens of other hopefuls read before taking his turn.
When it came time for his audition, he was able to see what the other actors had done, and he made sure that he didn't make the same mistake.
Harris had never studied acting in his life, but he had spent years perfecting his more sophisticated persona. The undertaking paid off when he landed a spot in the rep company. Over the next year, Jonathan played supporting parts in 16 of the group's plays, and before long, Harris was looking to tackle leading man roles.
I thought I was Cary Grant. Oh, looked in the mirror and I said, yes, yes, it's Cary Grant. And then I pulled myself together and said, are you kidding? You're a character man.
By 1942, after cutting his teeth in a variety of stock companies across the country, Jonathan set his sights on Broadway. He auditioned for the role of a Polish RAF officer in Gilbert Miller's production of Heart of a City. As he had done before, Harris embellished his past at the audition. He told producers his parents were from Poland and that he could speak with an authentic Polish accent. The plan worked, and at the age of 27, after only 3 years on stage, Jonathan Harris made his Broadway debut. That same year, Jonathan and Gertrude celebrated the birth of a son, Ricky. Harris, however, had little time for fatherhood.
I didn't do too well, really, because I was so intensely occupied with the theater in those days, and I'm ashamed.
But continued employment did allow Harris to give his son a better childhood than his own. In 1946, Jonathan worked with Paul Muni and Marlon Brando in A Flag is Born, a play about the struggle for a Jewish state. During the run, Jonathan's father, who had yet to see his son act, attended a performance and afterwards went backstage.
He came to the dressing room, gave me a hug and a kiss, and he said, "You belong here." I never forgot it.
Harris thoroughly enjoyed being a performer and completely immersed himself in every part. In a play called The Spa, Harris's commitment to his craft inspired a young stagehand to pursue his own acting dreams.
Watching someone do what they do best and having a great time, I thought, if I could learn to do this, have as much fun as Jonathan seems to be having, this is better than working.
Jonathan loved the attention he got from audiences, but he didn't limit his theatrics to the stage.
He had a walking stick. I remember him one night pointing at someone, saying, "Love me, didn't you?" And these were some people that were coming backstage to see someone else.
By 1950, television was sweeping across the country. For stage actors, the new medium offered a steady paycheck and the chance to be seen by millions of viewers. Harris welcomed the opportunity. Over the next few years, he appeared in dozens of television productions and became one of the industry's most stalwart character actors. In an episode of the NBC anthology series Lights Out, Jonathan played an agent of the devil. Like many other programs at the time, the show was shot live.
He will not go.
Hold your tongue. This does not concern you.
I say he will not go. He owes you not.
He has contracted to return this night. He cannot refuse. I only took what was my own. Hyperstenia. You cannot avail yourself of help from below without paying for it. I only took what was my own.
Well said, laddie.
What a pity. I would have preferred that you came willingly.
In 1953, the 38-year-old actor landed his first feature film, Botany Bay. Harris worked with Alan Ladd in the Paramount production about a prison ship bound for Australia.
I imagine there'll be openings at Botany Bay for the firm of Oakley, Inching and Sam.
Throats cut while you wait.
If you're agreed, that is.
I'm for it.
And you, Tom?
Aye, if you can find room for one other.
Who?
My chum, Hugh Talent.
What's he doing aboard?
The same as the rest of us.
Odd. Very odd indeed.
For a man who'd grown up in awe of the movies, the experience of being on a Hollywood soundstage was exhilarating. But the seafaring adventure sank at the box office, and Jonathan returned to working in television. But while the new medium lacked the glamour of the movies, it would soon help to make the boy from the Bronx a cult hero around the world. By 1957, Jonathan Harris's once doctored resume was now filled with dozens of legitimate stage and television credits. But his main source of income was still TV, and an increasing number of shows were now being produced in California. Leaving his wife and son in New York, Jonathan headed west. There, in addition to working steadily on the small screen, he was also cast in another feature film. But the RKO movie, Catch Me If You Can, nearly ended Harris's career and his life. The suspense thriller starred Gilbert Rowland and Dina Merrill and was shot in Cuba in the fall of 1958. At the time, Fidel Castro was on the verge of staging a coup.
Our American ambassador there, he said, "I keep telling the government and the State Department that Castro's in the hills and he's going to move in, and they don't believe me."
We were bombed and fired upon and in the airport. It's terrifying.
Castro put firebombs inside the air conditioning system, and we were stuck up there. But they had windows that went like this onto a little balcony, and then we got out through there.
But the threat of political upheaval did not stop production.
We got the wrap in, and we never saw the picture.
By the time shooting was complete, Castro was in power. The new dictator had the film seized, and Catch Me If You Can was never released. Jonathan's next movie experience was more routine. In 1959, he had a small but colorful role in Frank Borzegui's biblical epic, The Big Fisherman.
I believe you are qualified for the work, Esther. And very attractive. You will be a welcome member of our household, answerable only to me. I wish to have substantial results ready for His Majesty upon his return. You will have no complaint as to your wages. You may sit here. There are writing materials. If you require anything, strike this bell.
But The Big Fisherman was only a modest success and did little to help Jonathan's film career.
I never thought of it anymore, really. It was obvious to me that my career was going to be television. I knew that somehow.
Harris continued to be a frequent guest performer on many shows, including Shirley Temple's Storybook and The Twilight Zone. But eventually, he landed a co-starring role opposite Michael Rennie in the weekly series The Third Man.
I think it's an excellent investment at the price, Mr. Lime. When that man in New York told me about it, I cabled my Maltese banker friend, Yorgo Crocolefficini.
Friend who?
Yorgo Crocolefficini, and asked him to have this warehouse appraised, which he did. It's worth $220,000, Mr. Lime. I think we should buy it before they discover their mistake.
I'm surprised at you, Brad.
Half the episodes of The Third Man were filmed in Los Angeles, and half were shot in London, where director Arthur Hiller was an advisor on the show.
Jonathan, even though he was playing a role that was the same each week, wasn't the same each week. He would bring little things to it that were a little different, a little twist, a little turn.
While in England, Harris's 16-year-old son Ricky came to visit. Jonathan took the opportunity to try to bridge the gap that had grown between the two of them.
He was with the boy as much as he could be and go wandering the streets or go with his son to show him the museum or Portobello Road.
Jonathan made up for some time he'd lost with his son, but soon the in-demand actor was working again. While still a regular on The Third Man, Harris continued to guest star on other shows, including Bonanza and The Law and Mr. Jones with James Whitmore.
Do you know an organ grinder?
Do I what?
An organ grinder. If you do, you'd better bring him with you to the hearing tomorrow. Because, sir, we're going to make a monkey out of you.
Jonathan was now a familiar face in homes across America. And when The Third Man ended its 3-year run, Harris was quickly hired for another series. He starred opposite popular comedian Bill Dana.
Bill Dana made his fortune and his career with a character named Jose Jimenez.
Hello, every person. My name is Jose Jimenez.
In 1963, he brought that character to sitcom television in The Bill Dana Show. Jonathan Harris played the sort of persnickety hotel manager, Mr. Phillips.
The sitcom, which also featured Don Adams, showcased Jonathan's comedic talents.
Mr. Glick, the thread by which your job is hanging grows thinner every day. The only reason I keep you on here is because I happen to be tolerant, warm, and lovable, and...
You certainly are, Chief.
Don't interrupt when I'm being lovable.
By now, Jonathan had moved his wife Gertrude and son Ricky from New York into a spacious 3-bedroom home in sunny California. There, the 49-year-old self-made man indulged in his love of opera, knitting, gardening, and cooking.
He gave some wonderful parties. I know the first one I was at, there was one of the best beef stroganoffs I've ever had. I complimented Gertrude on her cooking, and she says, "Oh, I didn't cook it." She says, "Jonathan cooked it. I don't cook," she said.
But I loved it. It took 4 days for me to do that. That's the kind of cooking I did. And I did that for many, many years while I was working.
While Jonathan Harris was enjoying his new Hollywood life, American astronauts were training for the most daring mission mankind had ever undertaken.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The space race promised to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and Kennedy's challenge inspired a new generation to dream beyond the stars. One such dreamer was Irwin Allen, the Academy Award-winning producer behind such motion picture hits as The Lost World, 5 Weeks in a Balloon, and Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. In 1964, after successfully bringing Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea to the small screen, Allen produced a pilot for a big-budget television series about a family named Robinson sent on a mission to colonize another planet. Made for CBS, the Lost in Space pilot featured several well-known actors, including Guy Williams and June Lockhart as Professor John Robinson and his wife, Maureen, Mark Goddard and Marta Kristen as pilot Don West and Judy Robinson.
Well, Penny?
And rounding out the cast were Angela Cartwright and Billy Mooney as Penny and Will. At the time, the pilot was the most expensive ever produced. The network was impressed, but executives felt the show was missing certain key ingredients that would make it a surefire hit.
Irwin directed it, and it was all about adventure, but I think the network got in and said, we got to do something with this show, guys. Come on, you can't do the same thing every week.
Irwin Allen's solution was to add a villain to the series. After considering such actors as Jack Elam and Carol O'Connor, Allen cast Jonathan Harris as Dr. Zachary Smith, a saboteur aided and abetted by robot B9.
At exactly launch plus 8 hours, destroy.
The part would soon send Jonathan's career into the stratosphere and beyond.
Did you know that Jonathan Harris declined a walk-on role in the 1998 release of Lost in Space, the movie? He said, "I don't do cameos, baby."
After being added to the cast of Lost in Space in the role of the conniving Dr. Smith, Jonathan Harris asked producer Irwin Allen for a then unprecedented special guest star credit on each episode of the series. Allen was appalled by the bold request.
Well, the screaming, the howling. I never heard of such a thing. On in about 20 minutes. Finally, he ran out of breath and said, "Okay, I got it."
When Lost in Space premiered on September 15th, 1965, it was an immediate hit, and Jonathan was singled out by critics as the best villain on television.
Hey, what are you doing there? You're not supposed to do that.
Now, who's the doctor, you or me?
It was actually implied that this villainous character that sabotaged the mission and ended up with us was probably going to be killed off after a while.
Do you know what that virus would have done while the rest of your body was in a state of metabolic deanimation? Just taken it over, bit by bit. After 5 years, there'd be nothing left but the metal in your spacesuit. All the rest of you would be one big, raging mass of virus.
Jonathan played him as written, which was this really dark, straight-ahead villain who was trying to murder women and children.
But at the age of 51, Harris was an old pro and experienced enough to know that audiences would soon tire of the one-note character. Jonathan knew he had to do something and do it fast. After a few episodes, Harris began modifying the bad doctor to make him more appealing.
Oh, the pain. The pain.
My forte is comical, comedic villainy.
I'm a scoundrel, a thoroughly bad sort, hopelessly unreliable.
I can be vicious and evil, and you'll kiss and hug me.
By adjusting his performance, Jonathan turned the purely sinister Smith into a corrupt yet likable coward.
If it's natives you're after, there's a whole tribe of them right down there in the valley. The natives here are called Robinsons. I could show you the way.
If he'd have played that straight, he'd have had nothing. But he had the eyebrow go up, but they let him emote, and it worked.
Indeed.
Jonathan's new take on the character changed the show, and writers found that the family's robot was an excellent foil for Harris's comic version of Smith.
Dr. Smith is incapable of telling a lie. Repeat.
Dr. Smith is incapable
of telling a lie, you ninny.
The youngest member of the Robinson family, Will, also worked well with Jonathan's character.
That mountain must be 20,000 feet high at the very least. I could hardly breathe at that altitude.
It's only 100 feet higher than the campsite, Dr. Smith. I checked it.
Before long, The trio became the focus of the series. The new structure made Lost in Space even more popular, and within weeks, thanks to Jonathan Harris's inventive portrayal of Dr. Smith, the veteran actor became a small-screen superstar.
The spark that Jonathan brought to the show was immediate and noticeable. I mean, there was no hiding it.
Although Jonathan knew how well his character was working, he felt there was still room for improvement. By the middle of the first season, Harris began rewriting his dialogue. An otherwise audacious move that producer Irwin Allen did not discourage.
He came into my dressing room one day with that finger of his. Always it was under my nose when he talked to me. Like that. You, do more, and walked out. For the first time in my vast career, I had carte blanche to do anything I wanted.
I shall place my genius on display for all to see.
And we'd start working on a scene together, and he'd have a line, and then in the script I'd have my reply, and he'd say, no, boy, no, yeah. Before you say that, the robot will say this, and then I will say this, and this.
Give me that hole. Let an expert show you how this should be done.
And then you will deliver your line.
He's right, Dr. Smith. If you're not careful, the fish will get away.
Nonsense. Our finny friend is practically in the frying pan now.
Harris also came up with a list of alliterative insults, which soon worked their way into popular speech.
All that denouncing the robot as being a bumbling something or other.
You bubble-headed booby, cackling computer, you deplorable dummy, tin-plated traitor.
I don't know where he came up with those things, but that was his input.
He truly, single-handedly created the character of Dr. Zachary Smith that we know. This man we love to hate. Coward who would cower behind the little boy. Oh, the pain, save me, William. That's all him.
Thank you, my boy.
But with the premiere of Batman in January 1966, Lost in Space faced some heavy-hitting competition from the Caped Crusaders. To fight off the dynamic duo, the colorful second season of the series heightened the focus on its own trusty trio.
Billy and the robot and Jonathan were, let's face it, they were outstanding.
We were all just finding our groove, and it turned out that the character of Dr. Smith and the character of Will Robinson had a great chemistry together.
Kids watching at home also shared a bond with Jonathan's character. They were thrilled by Smith's frivolous and childlike mischief.
One of the things I loved about Dr. Smith is that he would always get them in such trouble and then be the one that was the most scared. You know?
To Harris's delight, he soon became an unlikely hero for children.
Kids were absolutely magnetized by him. He was like a big toy, and they wanted a toy like that. They were scared to death of him, but they loved him.
As the series progressed, stories relied heavily on Jonathan's unique contribution.
We don't need the writer or the director. All we need is the star. Me.
The original adventures of the Space Family Robinson were overshadowed by the antics of Dr. Smith. Plots became increasingly comedic and outrageous.
Oh, handsome, pretty, handsome. Dr. Smith?
Irwin Allen's future wife Sheila even got into the act.
Oh, the Space Vikings, that was the most fun. We could go anywhere, you know, everywhere we wanted to go with it.
There he goes again.
But I assumed, naturally, I thought that the mighty powers of Thor were now bestowed upon me.
Oh, but of course, the hammer came to you. It is apparent to me now it did not come to this mechanical being. However, Thor will wish to do battle against you.
I feel a sudden chill.
The popularity of Jonathan's character ultimately helped Lost in Space become more than just a television show. Merchandise from the series began flying off the shelves in stores across the country. Harris's image appeared on trading cards. There were lunchboxes, laser rifles, model kits, even a battery-powered toy robot. During the third year of Lost in Space, Other cast members who had taken a back seat to Harris were given more to do. But Dr. Smith was still the center of attention.
Come on, Smith, you're supposed to be helping. My presence here is quite help enough, Major.
By now, the show had become a pop culture fixture and began reflecting changes in society, including the carefree flower power movement.
There's an episode where Jonathan is like in this bad wig.
It's like Freaky Man, real freaky.
We're gonna freak out together. We're gonna it's freaky, baby.
We're gonna freak out together.
But being a space hippie wasn't Dr. Smith's most unusual incarnation. When the show's writers began to run out of fresh ideas for episodes toward the end of the third season, they turned their star into a stalk of celery.
Dr. Smith, you're acting like a real stalk of celery.
Of course I am. I look like celery. I draw moisture from the soil like celery. I feel the pulsing crunch of life.
It was part of the silliness of where the writers were taking us. And I think it was a joke they played on us. I don't think they were being really serious.
Fans of the series loved the zany antics, but critics began dismissing the show as little more than a campy space fantasy.
Some people would, of course, say it was camp. It's ridiculous, stupid, but it was not camp. It was extending what was written into a whole different aura. Anyone who doesn't like it can kiss me bottom.
In the spring of 1968, Jonathan and the rest of the cast of Lost in Space were riding high. A fourth season was promised by CBS, but then Dr. Smith and the Space Family Robinson seemed to be marooned for good when the network canceled the series after 83 episodes.
I don't know what happened. All I know is that we were all told we were coming back, and then, you know, we got a call that we weren't.
For Harris, who had by now been a working actor for nearly 3 decades, the cancellation was just a part of the business.
When the curtain comes down, you're disappointed. Always the curtain comes down. You know, I've done so much work. And then the curtain comes down and you go on to something else.
But could Harris go on? Could he really shake the character of Dr. Smith as easily as he planned? Or would the actor be forever lost in space?
Jonathan Harris's character, Dr. Smith, constantly hurled insults or Smithisms at the robot. Which is your favorite?
After the cancellation of Lost in Space in 1968, Jonathan Harris continued to delight television audiences with his irreverent charm. He guest starred in a variety of popular programs and even briefly considered taking a regular role in a production with the curious title Jumbelina and the Teeners. Irwin Allen wanted the 54-year-old actor for the lead in the proposed children's show about a balloon pilot and his teenage traveling companions, but Harris turned down the part. Jonathan did work with Allen again later in the producer's hit series Land of the Giants.
Examine your contract. I merely said I would take you back to Earth. I didn't say when, did I?
He got a number of guest star roles, but he didn't work nearly as often as other actors from that period of time. And I think it was hard for him, because no one could erase that Dr. Smith image.
As the psychedelic 60s drew to a close, there was a greater emphasis on realism in television. Popular shows such as Room 222 and The Mod Squad were more urban than urbane. Consequently, actors like Jonathan Harris were no longer in great demand. Jonathan still managed to find work, although not on unfamiliar ground. In 1973, when ABC ordered an animated special based on Lost in Space, Harris was more than happy to reprise the role he created.
I protest this outrage, Commander. I wish to bring charges against this clanking plot.
I never got a sense that Jonathan ever wanted to get away from Dr. Smith. He was very proud of what he did with the character in Dr. Smith. He was always proud of what he did in his work.
Indeed.
In the late 1970s, George Lucas's Star Wars reignited interest in science fiction films. One of the first Star Wars-inspired shows was the 1977 series Space Academy.
I played Commander Gampu, 300 years old. So I went to the executive producer. I said, what are we going to do about makeup? And he looked at me and, you don't need any.
While hard at work on Space Academy, Jonathan received the heartbreaking news that his 93-year-old father, the man who introduced him to the world of the performing arts, had been struck by a car and killed.
It was the worst day of my life, I think. And then the funeral, and then I went to work. But I did my crying alone at home.
In 1978, Jonathan began yet another phase in his career when he was hired as a voiceover actor on the popular ABC sci-fi series Battlestar Galactica. Harris, who was best known for his work starring opposite a robot, now played one.
I bring good news. We believe we have located the Battlestar Galactica. Oh? A scouting expedition of colonial vipers has landed on a listening post in the quadrant Otarsis.
Is she aware that she's being detected?
No. Our fighters will take her by complete surprise.
The years Jonathan had spent perfecting his diction served him well. Throughout the 1980s, he worked steadily in the voiceover field in both commercials and animated movies.
There are voices that you hear that you just go, you know. It's why he's a perfect voice for any animated film.
With his face absent from the screen for more than a decade, Harris was still best remembered for his work on Lost in Space. Thanks to reruns, the show continued to be popular across the globe, where Dr. Smith's pontifications and put-downs could be heard in numerous languages.
Mayor, hasta un cerebro débil como el suyo no aceptaría tantas tonterías.
In 1990, Jonathan agreed to participate in a reunion of the cast of Lost in Space, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the series. The event was attended by more than 30,000 devoted fans.
Thank you so much for coming to see us. We are very pleased to meet you.
Like his fellow cast members, Harris was surprised to learn that Lost in Space was more popular than ever. The reunion helped launch the greatest renewed interest in any TV show since Star Trek. And soon, Lost in Space fan clubs, books, and websites began popping up all over the world.
Suddenly, there are these conventions and personal appearances, talk about luck.
In Australia, the series was so popular that it aired in prime time for 20 years. And in 1993, Dr. Smith fans down under got to see their hero face to face when Jonathan appeared in a one-man show in Sydney.
Never fear, Smith is here.
As Lost in Space mania swept the globe, there was no one more amazed by the phenomenon than Jonathan himself.
We are a cult worldwide, and I'm a cult hero.
I see Jonathan at these conventions, and he's like, you know, a god amongst mortals. He loves to know that his work is appreciated, that it's still pleasing people daily all around the world.
In 1995, Jonathan agreed to appear in a television tribute to Irwin Allen, who died in 1991.
He knew a lot. He was very talented. And I must tell you, I'm very grateful to him.
But 2 years later, when plans were announced for a big-budget theatrical version of Lost in Space, featuring Gary Oldman as Dr. Smith, Harris was asked but declined to participate in the project.
After all, he had created the role of Dr. Smith, and if he couldn't be Dr. Smith again, why would he do a lesser role?
But Jonathan wasn't ready to abandon his screen alter ego just yet. In fact, Dr. Smith would soon open new doors for Harris and give the veteran actor more opportunities than he could have ever imagined.
You are watching Jonathan Harris on Biography.
Of the big screen version of Lost in Space in 1998, Jonathan Harris's popularity soared. At a Los Angeles convention designed to promote the New Line movie, Harris participated in a special Return to Earth celebration for the original members of the Jupiter 2. In the honorary ceremony, Dr. Smith and the space family Robinson were officially welcomed back to the planet. That same year, Jonathan celebrated 60 years of marriage to his wife, Gertrude. At 84, Harris was enjoying the fruits of his long career, but he wasn't ready to retire just yet. He continued making personal appearances everywhere, including at sci-fi conventions, toy stores, and television symposiums. Jonathan remained in demand in Hollywood as well. His talent as a voiceover artist led Toy Story director John Lasseter to cast Harris in both Toy Story 2 and A Bug's Life.
That's me. Every recording session we had with him, he plussed the character so much more. And we kept kind of adding more and more scenes with Manny.
From the most mysterious regions of uncharted Asia, I give you the Chinese cabinet of metamorphosis.
Get off the stage, you old hack!
I demand to know who said that. How dare you! Ingrates!
For Lasseter, working with Harris was a childhood dream come true.
Growing up with Lost in Space, and of course Dr. Smith from Lost in Space, is something that is just so familiar to you. Then when we finally met him, it was him. It was Dr. Smith.
Looking pretty darn sharp. Not bad for an old fart.
30 years after last playing Smith on camera, Jonathan got a chance to bring his alter ego to life again in the New Line 20th Century Fox production, Lost in Space Forever. Joining Harris in the television special were former co-stars Billy Mooney and robot B9, played by Bob May and voiced by Dick Tufeld.
I wrote the script for the scene with the three of us, the robot, Dr. Smith, and Will Robinson. Obviously, I really worked hard to kind of lock into that iambic pentameter of Smith and really get his alliterative insults and everything on the page because I wanted to please him.
Oh dear, where are we, William? I'm afraid to look.
Billy had written a finale for it, which I thought was a wonderful idea, which of course naturally I rewrote.
I've always admired your bravery, your courage, and I shall help you with the work. Yes, depending, of course, on the condition of my delicate back. You understand?
Yes, Dr. Smith, I understand. All of Jonathan's lines had been scratched out, and he had rewritten them, and this is the way it's going to be now. And just like in the old days, he made them better.
In 2002, the veteran actor was preparing to reprise his most famous role in a television movie entitled Lost in Space: The Journey Home. But weeks before production was to begin, Jonathan Harris died of heart failure after being hospitalized for a chronic back ailment. He was 87 years young. During the course of his life, Jonathan Harris gracefully made the transition from starry-eyed teenager to sophisticated character actor to pop culture icon. He managed to steal the hearts of a generation, just as he had managed to steal every scene.
Jonathan had this incredible gift and experience and talent. I mean, you have to have the talent to back it all up.
I've learned a lot from Jonathan. He was, like so many great actors, the epitome of a professional gentleman.
There are few people in your life that you can think of and you smile. And I smile when I think of him.
I created a Jonathan Harris actor. And that gives me such joy and happiness, you have no idea.
What would become of Dr. Smith if the Jupiter 2 crew did return to Earth? It's a question that is hotly debated by the show's die-hard fans. In an online poll, nearly 40% responded that Smith should not have to stand trial for his role in causing the Robinsons to become lost in space. A tribute, perhaps, to the humanity with which Harris played the devilishly endearing villain. Tomorrow on Biography, Audrey Hepburn. With beauty and grace, she became Hollywood's fairest lady. That's Audrey Hepburn, Thursday. For Biography, I'm Harry Smith. Good night.